Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Great Man Challenge. I am here with Steve Whittle from Tough to Talk, who was our first charity partner, and we're really excited to be working with them and collaborating and spreading the word and hoping to destigmatize the struggles that men have talking about their mental health. Steve, welcome.
We're pleased to be the first one to sign up as well, because we as soon as I read what you were doing, I just couldn't wait for the meeting. I bit your hand off. I think what you're doing is truly awesome.
Well, good, and I'm just so pleased. What we found so far from talking to everyone and actually making this statement and starting this project is that having worked in other industries that aren't philanthropic, that stepping into this space, the support and interest that people want to give is just so purpose-filled, and I've never had any. I've been working for myself for many years, and I started a couple of music festivals that were very purpose-driven in the sense that we wanted to create a space for people to truly be themselves, but actually directly engaging with something that is a conversation, about the kind of healing that we were hoping to inspire through the experience, but literally talking about that discussion has been amazing, and we are totally overwhelmed. I was talking about how overwhelming it was before we started talking on here. Can you tell us a little bit about Tough to Talk, how you founded it, and maybe about your own journey, and was there a moment or a process with your own mental health when you thought something's got to give?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tough to Talk was born out of my own lived experience. I actually created the charity because I wanted to prove other people wrong. Somebody once said to me, you're not alone, lots of men feel this way. So I went out of my way to prove them wrong, and then ended up starting a charity. So how that came about was when I was 49, I attempted suicide for the third time. But the journey up until that point was completely silent. Anybody who knows me knows that I have this Instagram-ready version of myself, So I was in the military for 13 years. I've got medals and war stories. I was in the fitness industry for a couple of decades, and I was doing really well at that. Then I fell into marketing. We're in the corporate finance world. You can imagine that's quite masculine and male-centric. I was always that go-to guy, I've got great tattoos, I ride a Harley Davidson, I've been married 3 times, got 2 grown-up boys who look up to me. So I've got all this going on, but what people didn't see in the background was how silent I was about complex PTSD, depression, and I got diagnosed very late in life with hyper-focused ADHD, which people who are now listening to this who know me all go, that explains a lot. And I made 3 attempts on my life, and the first 2 attempts I just didn't acknowledge, didn't deal with, because like a lot of men, I just felt, well, what a loser. The one thing I have control over is whether I live or I die, and I couldn't even get that right. So I just buried that, and the last thing I needed, having already felt like a huge burden to people, was for them to find out about everything that's going on in my life, including the suicide attempts, to then become a greater burden to people. So just buried it, didn't deal with it. And then when I was 49, the last attempt was the first time I reached out. And I'm not even sure why it happened. I just know that I phoned one of these hotlines. It was the Talking Services one. I just phoned them up. I didn't know what to say. It doesn't matter. They were amazing. They knew what to say. And they sent the crisis team round to my house. And then I was waiting for the crisis team, thinking, oh, my life, my whole world's about to come crashing down. My boss is about to find out, my girlfriend's about to find out, my boys, my whole world is about to find out that I haven't got my life together at all. I'm at rock bottom. Open the door to the crisis team. I'm really sorry. Actually, I'm all right now. You don't need to be here. But they're, again, amazing. They knew what to do. And it was them who said to me, please don't worry. You're not alone, lots of men feel this way. And I was like, well, that's rubbish. I know thousands of men. I don't know any of them who would say to me, I feel so low, I'm thinking about suicide. I don't know half of them who would ever say to me, in fact, any of them would say, I'm sad. So I went out of my way to prove them wrong, and the stats were unbelievable around suicide, male suicide, factors that lead to thoughts of suicide. I thought things need to change. I know it's a really long answer, but
it's brilliant. Keep going.
But what I noticed is that there was a huge gap between men who wanted help or needed help and those services that are providing help. So we know that through primary care, like your GP, secondary care, like your therapist maybe, and the third sector, like Andy's Man Club, Samaritan's Mind, they report that only a third of their services go to men. So we've got men who are silent saying, I'm going to deal with this on my own. And then the services are there if they need it, are not being used. That's a huge gap. So we decided to create Tough to Talk to bridge that gap, to break that silence. And rather than saying, I'm going to join this helpful group and wait for men, well, we're going to go to where they are. So we don't deal with men directly. So we take the fight to male-centric spaces, construction, manufacturing, infrastructure, uniform services, youth, and so on. And we support those organizations to support their men better. You know, whether that be training, you know, content, talks, how they market to men, changing their language, changing their tone of voice, those kind of things. Or we support charities and organizations to support vulnerable men, to make sure that they have the right training, they have the right content, they can spot the signs and then intervene if they need to, and so on. So rather than waiting for men to come to us, well, we're coming to you. And so that's how Tough to Talk started. And we're a couple of years old now, but we're slowly making waves.
It's amazing that you've, it's because that's what attracted me to Tough to Talk as a potential charity partner for us, is that it's a proactive thing, not a reactive thing.
Yeah.
Because like you've said and you've highlighted, is the fact is that what are we reacting to if people aren't talking? Because they don't know and it's silent. So you actually need to go out and find those people.
Yeah.
And have those discussions.
You're right. And the statistics are awful. I mean, the statistics show that, depending on what stats you read, but we believe that about 80% of all male suicides are functioning adults. So they are, they've got jobs, they've got friends, they've got family, and when they die, we say things like, well, I never saw that coming. Or, I knew they were struggling with this, but I didn't realize it was that bad. Well, why don't you realize it's that bad? You can only not realize it's that bad if A, you're not asking the right questions, or B, they're silent. So we need to help break that silence. Yeah,
it's interesting thing you say about questions there is that, you know, in my lived experience is that questions were just not asked. You know, people don't ask questions that they don't want to know the answers to, or they don't know how to deal with the answers that they get.
Yeah.
You know, I once got told that you should never ask anyone if they're happy because most people aren't. Which is just such a sad thing to say.
Yeah.
Because you know that's it, and it's a mentality and it's a belief. You know that also I recognise it coming from children of the generation who fought in the Second World War, who had such horrendous experiences and were told to come home and not talk about how they felt, and so they came home and shared their war stories. And the children of, you know, people, you know, my parents' generation who were born in the 1950s, you know, just after the Second World War had finished, and seeing their relationship with emotional expression and how it's almost, you know, like a toxic reaction, as though it's something that, you know, if you suddenly share one thing about how you feel, that's it. It's going to be the end of life as we know it, and everything will unravel. And of course, then there's the backlash of, you know, against the, you know, snowflakes, the woke culture, and all of this language that's used. It's ultimately to defame, you know, people and individuals who are really just trying to debunk that stigma and have healthier relationships.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I totally agree with, you know, I used to believe as well that it was a generational thing, you know, so you had the people that were post-war and then Gen X, and then I had the belief that as the generations were going through the alphabet, that actually it would get better. But actually it's not, it's getting worse. So what we're finding is that younger people who we would think would look at the previous generations and go, well, that's not going to be me. I'm going to talk more. They're having different problems to what we are having, but are reacting the same way. So we have to figure what that is. And we often hear people talk about stigma. Oh, that's because of stigma. Men don't talk because of stigma. Well, if you just leave it there, nothing will change. What is that stigma? Define stigma. If you define what the stigmas are that are preventing people from speaking up, that gives you actionable things that you can tackle. And so we looked into this, we researched this, and you know, we know that a lot of the stigma comes from generational gender bias, fed from our granddads to our dads, fed into us, we feed out to our brothers, into our sons, about what it is to be a man. What do you bring to the table? What will you be when you grow up? It's this hard-nosed, that's what we're going to do. We're going to be strong, we're going to be stoic, we're going to be providers, we're going to be silent. And that silence gets fed into us. I mean, you might have seen it before when a young boy falls over. And not in every case, but a lot of cases, that young boy gets picked up by a role model and stood up, and they're told, it doesn't hurt, you're okay, don't cry, you've got this, run it off. And that young boy runs off going, well, a role model, somebody I trust, has just told me that this doesn't hurt. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, I get it. Then they see somebody else fall over and they are picked up and hugged. And then they very quickly learn over time, actually my pain is not as important as their pain. They can speak up, I cannot. So that's where a lot of silence comes from there. And you couple that with the gender health gap or the gender mental health gap. There's lots of journals on this about how, and a massive broad strokes, by the way, Science Journal did a great article on most men like things, most women like people. You see that in the choices that we make. When you have a very, in the West, we have quite a equal opportunities, don't we? Equality of opportunities. And so when you give a nation equality of opportunities, they choose what they want to do. So most nurses, women; most HR teams, women; most bricklayers, men. And it supports that argument. We can do whatever we want, but that's what they choose, right? And when we look at the gender health gap for women, most women will ask for help if they need it. Most women will offer help to other people and get the help they need. And men are not doing the same. So actually, we've got a very silent group of men. If you ask any man, though, would you help me? They would break down walls for you. If you direct with that man and say, listen, I'm really struggling, so will you help me? But it's like you said before, there's that fear. So you mix up something called cognitive dissonance. If I know the right thing to do. I know that if I'm struggling with something, the best thing I can do is talk to you. But cognitive dissonance will say, no, you can't do that. And why is that? Well, it's fear. I don't know how you're going to react. And you have a fear of me telling you something because you don't know how you'll react. And often these fears are not founded. But because we don't do it and we don't experience it, it's always sitting there, This is how my men are so silent all the time.
Well, going back to what you're saying there, it's that cognitive dissonance, that it's almost a catch-22, and I can speak from my own experience of acknowledging that I'm a very emotional man, and yet knowing the environment that I grew up in, I knew that being a boy and being emotional wasn't a permissive thing. Do not cry, boys don't cry, etc., which is just the rhetoric that's been passed down through hundreds and hundreds of years of conditioning. And so, I then got into a position in my life where I would create the adaptive behaviors, because as a child, you cannot leave your environment. There is no way for you to say, oh, boundary, I'm off, because you're 5 years old. And so what you do is you adapt who you are in order to fit in for safety. And so I personally have grown up with a fear of having emotional conversations because they weren't permitted, and showing my true self, and at the same time needing to have emotional conversations. And so, even to this day, and this will, I'll continue to work on it, but it's going to be there in the background, is this fear of that depth that I so deeply crave at the same time, which is very, very confusing emotionally and internally, and has led, those adaptive behaviors were survival techniques, and in early childhood, were misbehaving, and humor has been a big deflector and a big mask of mine, and then into later life using alcohol and drugs, and ultimately making choices that have irreparably changed the course of my life, and have affected myself and other people in negative and damaging ways. And we were talking about it a little bit before the cameras were rolling. I'm still metabolizing and assimilating how to integrate my story in a way that's creates safety for myself, for my boy and for my boy's mum, whilst at the same time acknowledging the reality of where I'm at, so that hopefully it might resonate with other men and indeed people who have been party to a similar experience, because we do have these similar experiences. And like you said earlier on, that you didn't believe anybody could possibly be feeling the way that you were and would say these things that you were saying. And in actual fact, there's thousands of people all over the country, and it's simply not talking, and breaking down those boundaries, and coming back around to also what you were talking about, that cognitive dissonance. And we spoke about it on one of our initial calls, where there are a lot of public figures saying men need to talk up, men need to talk about how they're feeling and their struggles. Sure. And people are going, yeah, but they don't, because of the fear.
Yeah.
And so, what we want to be doing with our channel and through this documentary is to be discussing more around those core themes that affect people, so that people can actually say, hey, like, right, well, yeah, people are struggling and I'm struggling, but actually, like, that thing is, I really resonate with that, or that, not so much, but just to be having those conversations.
You're right, there are so many people out there who are respected figures, who talk a lot, say men just need to talk more. But we don't have a lot of men don't have the emotional IQ. They don't got the lived experience of what it's like to talk more. So just saying to another man, just talk more, they go, yeah, I know, but it's like the phrase, there's two things on this. One is the phrase, it's okay to not be okay. We know that when most women hear that phrase, it's okay not to be okay, they go, yeah, I know. And it's normally followed by a WhatsApp group being set up, cups of tea being handed out. You've got to help Sandra. She's not okay. She's acknowledged that. Let's get around there. When you speak to most men and say it's okay to not be okay, they just go, fine. Misery is fine. I'll just sit in my own.
I'll just not be okay forever.
Yeah, because I understand the concept of what you're trying to say. I understand that it's okay not to be okay. Well, I'm not okay. Well, what does that mean? There's no group getting around them there. And then you have like amazing figures like Prince William, for example. He spoke recently saying that men need to speak more, and he was lauded. Everyone's saying, yeah, even Prince William gets it. Absolutely. Well, actually, you've not added any value there. Every man who saw that went, yeah, I know. That's it. But imagine if Prince William actually came on and said, men need to talk, but because I know what it's like. With my all the troubles that I've been having recently within my family, it's made me feel like this. I'm so worried about what my boys are thinking all the time because of what's going on with their mum. And, we're having to deal with this. When I found out this news, it made me feel like this. And then all I wanted to do was maybe stay silent and quiet. But actually, the best thing I did was do this, this, and this, leading by example, showing examples. And then other men go, oh, okay, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. That leading by example. And I think that's a lot about what the Greater Man Challenge is going to be able to show. Real life examples of, men not detracting from masculinity, because masculinity is our superpower, right? But actually just adding one thing, which is that removal of silence. And if we can do that, then we'll change so many lives.
You guys have only been going for 2 years, so... Yeah. That's a relatively short amount of time, but how have you seen the conversation shift over the past couple of years since the inception of Tough to Talk to now, in terms of your experience in the industry and maybe even anecdotally with
Sure.
With relationships that you've started?
The hardest part is helping organizations understand where we sit. And so the conversation has changed a lot recently, because when we're challenging organizations to make men's issues be part of the EDI, conversation, that inclusivity, is your program, you're just catering to minority groups when that the majority of your workforce are men, so how are they being included in these conversations? And so what we're starting to see now are amazing organizations going, do you know what, this is an EDI issue. We need to bring solutions to the table for the people we serve, and the people we serve are men, right? And so that's really good, because then what happens is the conversation starts at the top and it comes down and it works its way back up, rather than just we'll just do this for these people here. And then when they ask for help and they go, I'll follow up on it, they go, I don't know what you're talking about. It has to start at the top, all the way down and work its way back up. And, to give you great examples, I can't say who it is just yet, because there's about to be a big thing about it, but we're working with one of the largest UK government agencies. And we did exactly that. Started at the top, presented to the board about all the benefits they will get if they serve their men better. And then we worked our way down by providing information and training, and we trained up 87 of their team as tough talkers. And those tough talkers are chosen, handpicked by that organization as leaders of men. So they're not leaders by title. They are influential, they're go-to people, and more often than not they said, I don't think this training's for me. Well, because you said that, this is exactly for you, right? And we train them in how to have, to go out of their way to influence their space to make it better for men. We train them to have interactions with other men, to have difficult conversations, sharing a bit of themselves and having difficult conversations that may not have anything to do with suicide, but make you wince a little bit inside when you hear it. You know, an ill child, maybe you're gambling, maybe you're drinking too much, and you hear that and you go, we're gonna have a conversation about this. And lastly, interventions. Have difficult conversations about suicide. Talk openly about it and be trained to put a suicide safety plan in place. And these tough talkers, we trained them up in February, and I had a meeting with them all a couple of weeks ago, and to see what impact they've been having and to give them an update. All 87 had reported having difficult conversations with men in their spaces. They had reported, the majority of them reported how they fed back up through the system and it had been really well received on how they could make changes. But more importantly, 6 of them have done suicide interventions, saved 6 lives. Now, the only way this would have worked is if the only way this worked is because they put this as part of their EDI campaign. Said we serve mostly men, so therefore we must adapt. Our program needs to be strategic to reach all of those hard to reach men. And as they feed this back up, it's all well received. That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, well, here's what you need. Okay, just that's constant cycle. So even though we've only been going a couple of years, we've got a couple of these organizations on board now who are just reporting this great stuff. I mean, the cynic in me knows that when you have an organization that's majority men and you serve your men better and get the most out of men, we know that you're going to get a better return on investment financially, presenteeism, absenteeism, all of those things. But actually, the things that they report back on to us is how good it makes the whole organization feel when their men are, looked after well.
Running a charity like Tough to Talk must be emotionally intense at times. How do you look after yourself? Because I see you're pretty prolific on LinkedIn, and you're doing all this amazing work. But yeah, how do you look after, number one, to give you that 100% so that everyone else can, rise up alongside?
It is tough. I would love to say, oh no, it just, because you're in this environment all the time, it just kind of rubs off on you. But no, it is. I mean, I do find it personally tough. I mean, I had to have 7 months of trauma counseling to deal with my complex PTSD. And, it was so tough. It used to be so hard. I remember, and when I think back to those times now when I was sat with my therapist and he would say, how are you doing today? And I don't know if it was because that environment, and I would sit, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to tell you. And then he'd like work on me on how to describe emotions and stuff. And then I would just say, I'm sad. And he goes, and how long have you been feeling like this? And I go, I don't know. I just don't know how long I felt sad for. This is how I feel sad. And it took a long time to find you're happy, and it's, so when you're rock bottom trying to find you're happy, without guidance, without a guide, without a system, is really difficult. So what I learned through this coaching and, through the charity and all the amazing people who do great support for men, I've learned through all of these people that actually a lot of the time it's about taking the right action. So, when that phrase we were talking about before, it's okay to not be okay, we don't like that phrase, but we like the phrase, it's okay not to be okay as long as you're doing something about it. Find your happy, what is it that you need to do? So, running the charity is really tough because we don't deal with men directly unless we are doing talks, presentations, training, and so on. During Mental Health Awareness Week, and you can imagine how many talks I had to do during that week, but in that week I also did 4 suicide interventions.
Wow.
And I had to take all those home. I own those 4 now. And, they are all still with us. And and I'm incredibly proud to have been able to help them. But you know, you can't do this job and then not own a lot of that stuff. So I have to look after myself physically. I have to make sure that I'm right mentally and emotionally. Me and my partner have a code, which is simple numbers. She'll say, what number are you today? And if I'm anything lower than a 6, I know her and I are having a conversation, right? And it's learning to have that honesty with those people closest to you. You know, really, really does help. So, you know, to people who are struggling, find you're happy, take action. You know, talk to people, find out what those actions are. But generally, good fitness, so good physical fitness, good emotional IQ, and looking after your mental health are super key. And you know, you and I were talking about alcohol before, weren't we? And you went off alcohol.
Yeah, 4 years and a month ago.
Yeah, perfect. So you know that to take action for you was stop drinking.
Yeah, unfortunately not soon enough, but I also was doing a breathwork session and the breathworker instructor said, although it may not feel like it, this is happening exactly when it needs to and the timing is perfect.
Yes, of
so
course.
It's that, and that was such a helpful thing to hear, because so often when we're in the depths of despair, that we can just wish that we could go and change things or do things differently or have all of these, you know, regrets. And you know, regrets can be helpful, and guilt can be a helpful emotion, because guilt tells you when you've done something wrong, whereas shame is an emotion that when you think you are wrong, and they're two very different things. And there's something that I've experienced a lot of both, from a very young age of not being able to sort of show up as I was, and then that baking into all these adaptive behaviors that sort of perpetuated that sense of guilt and shame. And you know, even to this day, you know, I receive that in infrequent communication from certain people, and I've had to create boundaries in order to just acknowledge and saying that's not a me thing.
Yeah.
You know, I am no more or less valuable than any other human being on the planet. And I think self-worth is such a important and subjective thing, because you know, people build these sort of financial castles around themselves and status and everything that ultimately just isn't actually real.
Yeah.
We are no more valuable than anyone else on the planet.
I agree. And I love what you said about self-worth, right? Because one thing is universally true, as I see it, you know, from our experiences, is that talking about issues is essential, and your self-worth. You know, you value yourself and create your own boundaries. That's incredible. They are universally true in getting the support you need. Everything else is going to be different from person to person, right? So you do breath work, right? Breath work makes me feel so uncomfortable to do that I know that doesn't work for me. So why would I do breath work? You know, so to anybody who's listening to this and you go, oh man, yeah, I don't want to have to go and do all of that. I'm going to do this and go take cold showers or ice baths and stuff like that. No, you do what works for you. Try everything. Find what works for you. But talking and self-worth, once you find your value, then that's where you'll find your solution.
Yeah, and these changes to lifestyle can be very small, incremental, and 100% should be manageable, because it's a very, you know, I can speak for myself and my male friends that I witness who are currently and have been through their struggles, that we get to a rock bottom and then we make some massive, unachievable mountain of list of like what we need to get and do in order to get from here to there, and you never make it from there. Because you can't do all this stuff. And balance is not adding more stuff to a life, it's usually taking stuff away. So if you're working loads but think you need to be doing more fitness, if you are able, work a little bit less and run a little bit more. Don't just keep working your tits off and then run as much as you can and sign up to the London Marathon or whenever it is. Like, you know.
Yeah, I've done that. I have done that before, signed up to something big. And then it's, you know, the whole training leading to it is it's just like ruined me. When it was all over, I had that such emptiness, and the opposite of self-worth. It was, you are right, so small increments. And that's why talking is so important. Talking to the right people, getting the support you need, will give you that guidance, that little impetus you need to do, and then live it.
Yeah.
And then you go, actually, that did work. So what's next?
And it comes back to those addictive behaviors. Addiction is all addiction is moving away from pain. That's all it is. And so there's a really good and useful message in addiction, whatever it is, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, exercise, work, whatever it is. It's like,
Yeah.
what am I chasing, or what am I running away from? And yeah, I said to Amelia at Suicide & Co, it's been a really just a helpful thing for me to acknowledge, yeah, as I did to you before we started rolling the cameras, that actually I'm in a lot of pain at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, as long as you're doing something about it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
Talking.
Talking. No, you're absolutely right. And that's the hardest part, there's so many people, like you said, who mask pain through distraction. And that distraction is often something that's bad for you, like you say, addiction and so on. A lot of that that falls under suicide behaviors. You find a lot of people who are having thoughts of suicide, or have had a thought of suicide, will then mask that through suicide behaviors just to get through the day. I don't want to think about suicide, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to get through the day, and eventually it just gets worse and worse and worse. And they're heading towards suicide, not away from it, by masking.
So it's quite a long one, so I'm actually just going to read it straight off the laptop.
Okay.
For the viewers. I don't want to be like looking down and trying to pretend that I'm not doing this. Why do you think projects like the Greater Man Challenge are so important in a time where traditional institutions are failing to provide answers, and the vacuum is increasingly filled by influencers and figures in the manosphere who offer easy, often harmful definitions of masculinity rooted in control, dominance and disconnection? We should maybe follow up with like a more light-hearted one to sign off. But
Yeah, you're right. So, first of all, the Greater Man Challenge is very real. So it's real, relatable men, okay, who are leading the project. They're going to be part of the project and taking part in the project. So they're going to be so relatable, and so far removed from the Andrew Tates of the world. And so it's very, very real. And when, and I spoke to you off camera before about, you call it the Greater Man Challenge, right? I always say the Greater Man Challenge is about greater men, right? How do we become a greater man? And often we're constantly being told, to be a greater man, you need to be less toxic, less fragile, less of this, less of that, less weak, less all these things, right? Or I might be, but actually, for most men, masculinity is our superpower. It's what makes us so good. And to be a greater man, we need to be less silent. And so if we can learn from this whole project, men can relate to what you're showing, then we'll be greater men for having watched it, for having been a part of it. And the fact that this is going to go around the world, on the web and everywhere else, and people are going to be able to see this and have it relate to it. And that's where you get impact, because you've got real people doing it. I see in a lot of organizations that do care about men, that provide services for men, often the people who are providing these services are women. It's a sad state of affairs that most people who are in these caring roles are women. And so they're not relatable. So often men go, okay, yes, it's an email from HR, or this is, from this organization. It's not women's fault. We're just not feeding back to them. And we just want more relatable role models, okay? We need to out-role model Andrew Tate, I guess is what we're saying. And all of you who are running the Greater Man Challenge are that. The people you put on this boat to talk about themselves and go through this challenge are going to be that, all right? And this is what I love about the Greater Man Challenge, is it's relatable, real men in the real world.
it's a lovely thing to hear, because you're almost talking about the projected arc of where this thing might go, and for us we're really much just in the thick of sort of doing everything at the moment and trying to figure out how to raise funds and how to find the men that we want to bring on board for this boat trip, and indeed what we want the Greater Man Challenge to turn into beyond the boat, and the legacy of it being a project that offers these adventure experiences with a mental health focus to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it or have the opportunity to do so far beyond the boat, whether it be climbing a mountain in Morocco or going, whitewater rafting in New Zealand or whatever that looks like. And also, coming back to that point you're talking about, bridging the gap between the masculine and the feminine, because we are being increasingly put by said influencers, said Andrew Tates, into our silos. And that between that cancel culture and woke culture, it's breeding a very sort of disparate and disconnected environment. And the greater man challenge is, we do this not because we just want to be hanging out with men all the time talking about men's mental health and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, sure, that's the steer on it, but this is a very inclusive thing that we're doing here, and men's mental health affects absolutely everybody, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, God, I talk about allyship all the time, and you know, we know full well that most of the organisations that contact us, it's coming from often a female in that organisation saying, listen, we got a problem with men, and we think that you can help us solve these problems. You know, so we're two sides of the same coin, and yeah, greater men is going to make a greater society, you know. So I absolutely agree. We've got to do it for society to have greater men. And what I really hope to see is that when this challenge is complete, and everybody who has seen it and been a part of this journey, they're going to go back to their families, and they're going to look down at their boys, and they're going to say, well, I'm going to make life different for my boys, and I'm going to be a better role model for them. And then they grow and they're a better role model, and they're entering the workforce. We just get this great cycle of change, you know, because somebody's seen the greater man challenge.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed. And, you know, like Tom said in his discussion about ADHD a couple of weeks ago, if we can save one life, then the whole thing's worth it. And hopefully it'll be many more.
Yes.
But Steve, thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it.
No worries.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cool. And cut. Amazing. Oh, watch out for my light.
Take out the light.